The Lowe Art Museum was founded in 1950, when it was actually called the Lowe Art Gallery, founded in 2 classrooms here on our campus in Coral Gables. And at that time, and for actually many years to come, the Lowe was the only art museum in town. So we are not only the first art museum in our region, but we are actually the only comprehensive encyclopedic museum in Miami. We have almost 19,000 objects which span 5,000 years of universal history. So we have not just a singular story to tell, we have many, many stories to tell, and I do believe that that is what distinguishes us from the other institutions in our area. Our vision and our mission is, as you would expect, inextricably linked to our greatest asset, which is, of course, the collection that I just described in the broadest of brush strokes. We need to not only make sure that our collection is activated and available, both literally and metaphorically, to our broad base of constituents, but also that we are making it relevant. And relevant in Miami in 2016 means talking to contemporary art, culture, and practice. So my path to the Lowe was very nonlinear, like many people's career trajectories. I actually studied political science and French at Mount Holyoke College, not really sure what I wanted to do with my post-collegiate life. And when I graduated, I still was plagued with a certain degree of uncertainty. So I decided to go to law school, which sounded like a pretty conservative or at least safe bet for me. So I did in fact attend law school and sat for the bar exam. But during that process, I did a lot of soul searching and realized that it was really art that gave me the greatest sense of joy and fulfillment. To be able to create a museum from the ground up was a tremendous opportunity and a wonderful learning experience for me, because museums are about more than just objects, of course. You have to think about the lighting, you have to think about security. Above all, you have to think about how you're going to be connecting with people through your objects in very deep and profound ways. So it was really an education for me, which left me prepared to take the helm of the Lowe Art Museum. So we all have our own likes and dislikes, and that's the same pertains to museum curators and museum directors. The key is being self-aware and being able to take a step back and at least recognize when your own proclivities, your own likes and dislikes are coming into play, because of course they're going to be there, and in theory people are put in charge of museums as directors and curators because they have a very highly honed sensibility in terms of their aesthetic and what qualifies as art. The temporary exhibitions are a particularly important opportunity for us to cover the broadest possible array of types of art in terms of media and genres, but also to address social issues, to make sure that we are representing a very dynamic and diverse range of artists whose artists based on identity issues, including gender, nationality, race, their own personal convictions, but also to think about who those artists are reaching through their art. When you've done something, the same thing, more or less, for a very long period of time, when you've immersed yourself in study, but also through the ongoing education that occurs when you're looking and talking and thinking, you develop this innate sensibility. It's what Malcolm Gladwell, of course, refers to as the snap judgment in his iconic book, Blink. So I like to think that I have that capacity now, having been an art historian for over 20 years, that I intuitively know when something fulfills the criteria of what to me is good art. And my criteria are actually very straightforward. I trained as a scholar of 18th century Italian art, which, as you might imagine, does not often resonate across the fields of modern and contemporary. So early on I decided that I needed to set some standards so that I had my own internal litmus test when I was looking at any type of art, whether it's 18th century or earlier or was created yesterday. So for me, beyond that intuitive sense, something that really hits me in the solar plexus as some art that's good, I really look for art that has a solid intellectual thesis, an idea really, and a real idea, one that can be explained and that is truly convincing or compelling. I also look for something that is well crafted. And I think that there's enough elasticity in this notion of craftsmanship, something that's well made, that it can accommodate something that is carved from granite, and it can also make allowances for objects that are 3D printed. And it's surprisingly uncommon to find works that hit both of those criteria squarely on the head. I certainly don't allow market forces to drive my decisions, but I think any director or curator needs to be aware of what's happening. They need to understand what the trends are, because trends ultimately are a reflection of public opinion, of what is interesting to people who are purchasing art, who are enjoying art, who are visiting museums, and to look for that perfect point on the graph where my interests and my goals for my institution cross the market conditions that are driving certain trends. I think that's a really important place for a museum to be, a point to occupy, not necessarily for their permanent collections, because you need to remain true to your identity, but through temporary exhibitions, short-term projects that allow museums to connect with their audiences and with artists in a very deep and profound manner. I think that art fairs generally are a positive phenomenon, and I do view them as a phenomenon because they heighten awareness. They also allow people to have these remarkable experiences of immersing themselves in very intensive and compressed periods of time with some truly remarkable works of art. When you walk the floors of some of the larger fairs, it's an education in an afternoon. The museum field has tried very hard in the last 25, 30 years to shift from being a temple to more of an agora, a meeting place where people can come together and benefit from civic as well as artistic discourse. Technology occupies two very fundamental roles. One is in the production of art itself. The wonderful the wonderful exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Manus Ex Machina, makes very clear just how important technology has become. And I think we're still only at the very early stages of where we're going in terms of the role of technology in art production. But as that exhibition makes clear, it's a case of both and, not either or. We have technology that allows us to create truly phenomenal, fantastic aesthetic objects, but we still need the mind behind it, the ideas driving it, and I don't think it will ever, the technological product will ever fully displace those objects, those things that are handmade. In terms of providing tools for people to pursue self-directed learning in the context of art and museums, but also to crowdsource ideas, to really have conversations and to not only inform themselves, but also bring new and different perspectives to a field that was really quite closed for a very long time, for the first century, I would say, of the modern museum as we know it. We use it, exploit it in the best possible sense, while never losing sight of the reasons why. I think museum educators, museum directors, curators are all at this point in the evolution of technology in a museum environment very leery of technology for technology's sake. There's nothing sadder than seeing an abandoned educational kiosk in a beautiful gallery, one that is not being used or worse still, actually just doesn't function and looks like a relic of the past itself. And I don't think that there's any question that the digital replication of an image is a substitute for the authentic object. I have yet to meet someone who wants to argue the point that yes, it's a one-to-one correlation. I think people are willing to concede that when you're looking at something digitally, you are losing a lot of nuance. You don't understand color, you don't understand facture or texture. You don't even really understand dimension or scale, even if the caption has those measurements. It's not the same as standing before an object and experiencing it with all of your senses. Having said that, having the capacity to look at an entire range, a body of work, for example, of Sean Scully on Fine Art Biblio, works that are spread around the globe that you really couldn't see in one location, except perhaps for a 3-month period of time during a monographic exhibition at one of the larger arts institutions in the world. It's a rare moment, and not a lot of people would have the capacity to physically attend that sort of exhibition. So in the absence thereof, I think that technology fulfills a wonderful need in that sense, that you have this surrogate exhibition, as it were, in this specific example, that does allow you to get a sense, a deeper sense of the artist, his body of work, his evolution, and the ideas that stand behind them. Art, like all creative endeavors, is organic. It's constantly evolving. If we cast our eyes back, cast our minds back, and think about what was happening before the Renaissance, the great rebirth of art, we will be reminded of a very important fact that artists weren't valued for their minds. The art was classified as a manual of the hands discipline. In fact, there wasn't even a guild in Renaissance Florence that was available to artists. They were classified with the druggists and the barbers, because they were grinding their pigments, and therefore put with the druggists and the barbers because they were using some of the sharp tools in the case of sculptors. And I think that that's, as a benchmark to think about how things have changed over the past, granted, 7 centuries, but it is an apt reminder that things are constantly fluid and in motion. Similarly, when we look back to see not just styles, but I think genres of art as they have come into fashion and out of fashion, but even more importantly, been recognized as fine art. Photography is the most significant example of this in the last 150 years. But also, if we think about glass and the studio art projects or programs, we're reminded that for a very long time, glass was considered a functional art. That has now certainly changed. I think that there's a general acceptance of the fact that glass is a category of fine art, and you can see from the beautiful objects that surround us here in the Lowe's Palais Pavilion that really this is a class of objects that has reached a level of maturity, that it really does have the same aesthetic range, the same degree of thought, the same degree of craft, and I mean that in the best possible sense of the word, in terms of actually using the hands and the mind to create a beautiful object. The glass really has reached a level of parity with other more generally accepted genres of art, where you can take an early Renaissance painting and make it relevant to the practice of someone who is in his or her studio today, not necessarily replicating to those practices, but thinking about them, mediating them, responding to them, even denying them. I think that that's a very important form of engagement with the historic past in terms of artistic practice, but just knowing what it was and the reasons why you either want to incorporate it into your art and make it your own, or again, to reject it entirely. But that conscious interweaving of the two is what we're looking for, above all, through our temporary exhibitions. My personal mission statement is not related to art at all. It's very simple. It's that I should always show compassion. And I think that in a world that's as fraught and complicated as ours, that's a very basic and simple rule to abide by. But I also think that in a field like the art world, the museum field, we become so entrenched in what we're doing, and at a certain moment, this is not a field for the faint of heart. These are labors, endeavors driven by passion, not necessarily by the material rewards of the profession, but because we are all so passionate about what we're doing, because the stakes are sometimes so high. It's, I think, easy to forget that we are all human at the end of the day, and we need to make allowances for ourselves and for one another.